Hello, welcome to this episode of our program World Today, where we are having an in-depth look to the local and international press headlines. We have with us for discussion Dr. Mohamed Fouad, who is economic and political analyst. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We start from Ahram Online, and Foreign Minister Shukri discusses Sisi's visit to Germany with German counterpart. And it says that Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri discussed preparations for President Fattah al-Sisi's visit to Germany with his German counterpart Frank-Walter Steinmeier in a telephone call earlier on Wednesday. The visit of President Fattah al-Sisi that has seen some controversies during the past days, but confirmed by Merkel that it is very much necessary.
Correct. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel had met President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi during the March summit and has invited at that time President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi for a visit in Germany. We also need to emphasize the summit. Germany with the German giant Siemens have pledged 10 billion euros worth of investments in the Egyptian power sector, and also confirmed the German side commitment to the progress in Egypt. There have been no changes to Chancellor Angela Merkel's invitation to President Fattah al-Sisi. The official German news agency today has confirmed that despite minor discussions which has been attributed to the Bundestag spokesman in Germany, that the visit will go on as planned.
Yes. The Gulf today, and Zind is Egypt Justice Minister. It says Egypt's new Justice Minister Ahmed Zind, sworn in, replaces Mahfouz Saber, who quit last week in the face of an uproar over comments he made in a television interview. Saber was accused of being snobbish, that is how the Gulf today is saying it, for saying that the children of sanitary workers should not be allowed to be judges who must come from an appropriate background. Zind is the chairman of the Judge Club, a powerful association of members of the judiciary, and has been an outspoken supporter of the leadership. So, yes, Councillor Zind is the new Justice Minister. How can we describe the judiciary scene right now? Does this to do with any court trials, the speedy of trials, because many people are putting many speculations on Zind's appointments?
I think a lot of the discussions regarding whether the selection of Minister Zind is controversial or not is a little out of proportion, so to speak. Specifically, if we come down to technicality, the role of the Minister of Justice. The Minister of Justice has no control over the sequence of trials, has no control over the verdict of trials, he has no control over the selection of judges. He is a chief administrator, so to speak, who controls perhaps all administrative stuff that has to do with the judiciary system, the funding for the courts, any administrative matter. But he has absolutely no control over the judicial system. So discussions or speculations into the character of who is the Minister of Justice, I think it's more of a discussion, could be described as a slightly misinformed. I think the role of the Minister of Justice has absolutely no control of the judiciary system.
Right, moving on to the Daily Star, Libyan Islamist leader proposes elections to end conflict, and it says Tripoli fresh elections are the only way to end conflict in Libya, where two government and parliament are competing for power, and the country's oil wealth and influential Islamist supporter of a self-declared government in Tripoli said. Prime Minister Abdullah Al-Thani's internationally recognized government and elected parliament have operated out of eastern Libya since a rival armed faction called Libya Dawn took over Tripoli in August and set up its own government. Yes, the situation in Libya is very much chaotic and should have a real breakthrough. Now, through this proposal of holding early elections, or through an international community's support for the legitimate authority there, through an interference of, or rather an Arab interference, or this unfinished NATO operation. I mean, how can you describe the situation, or how a breakthrough can really be made in Libya?
The United Nations and the international community at large, they have been persuading the rival factions to form a unity government. This obviously has not worked. This particular proposition of holding an early election, I think it needs to be described as preposterous as best, because the same situation that we have seen, for example, if you can take a clear example also from the African continent, comes from Ivory Coast, when an election was held during apartheid, when you have the North fighting the South. Any time where there is an armed conflict taking place on the ground, the notion of holding election comes with a very big question mark as who is going to guarantee the fairness of such elections while two rival forces are on the ground holding guns to each other's heads. So I think before an election takes place, there needs to be a disarmament. There needs to be no fighting, no scrimmages on the ground before we can come and talk about elections. However, because any election under such circumstances would be biased to begin with.
Right. From the Times of Israel, and it says France to push 18-month timetable for Mid-East peace. It says ahead of submitting draft UN resolution on negotiations, Paris reportedly threatens to recognize Palestine should talks fail. France's upcoming bid for a renewed Middle East peace push at the UN sets a timetable of 18 months for a final status agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, and threaten French recognition of Palestine should negotiations fail. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, we are aware that 2 years ago the United States started its bid for new negotiations, peace negotiations, and the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry came to the Middle East with his plan and proposals put on the ground. The Israeli stagnant policy continued on with illegal settlements, with even initiating a new war on Gaza and all this. Now France is pushing with a totally new bid, and this bid with a clear warning from Paris to recognize the Palestinian as a Palestinian state should the negotiations fail. Now, 3 points. The first, would the French recognition to Palestine make of it a real country, a real state? Second, would it confront a US veto? Third, on which grounds should negotiations return to the table?
Okay, very, very good questions. Yes, a French recognition of the Palestine state would add pressure on Israel in front of the international community. Second, if we come and talk about this particular resolution, let's just be frank about what's the French draft of this particular two-state solution. With very little modification, is not different than any other past efforts to revive the peace process. Since the Six-Day War, every single administration, whether on the US or on the European side, have come up with a similar situation to end the particular situation. Even the Arab League in 2002, they have adopted the Arab Peace Initiative, which had a similar rendition of what the French is now offering. However, what's different here, to come to your second question, is that the French government is betting that the current situation between the US and Israel may avert a US veto to this particular resolution, as they believe that the Obama administration is not entirely fond of the Netanyahu administration at this particular stage, which might lead to the US not to veto such resolution, bringing this into the Security Council, although not 100% binding as other resolutions have taken place. However, would also add more pressure on Israel.
But would this make of Palestine a state, a recognized state? And Why now a European role in the issue? It was always the United States. Now it's totally shifted to the European side, particularly France this time. And at the same time, we all know that Israel takes negotiations as a pretext for it to go on the ground while the negotiations are ongoing. There are settlements activities on the ground, changing the demographic and the geographic situation or status quo on the ground. So exactly what are the bases on the ground for these negotiations? I mean, here are there certain terms put on both Israel and the Palestinians in order to start a real and serious negotiations here?
I think, and this has not changed, according to all the polls conducted on the ground, both sides, whether the Israeli and Palestinian, the people, they do support the two-state solution, which is also adding fire to this. However, exactly what you're saying is it comes to the fine prints where both sides cannot agree. As Israel also continues to build settlements, the notion under all the notion that that is the basis of all such agreement, which is going back to the pre-1967 borders, becomes more and more distance as Israel continues to build new settlements.
Exactly. And so before starting any kind of negotiations, I guess France has to review what are the grounds they're offering here for the Palestinians.
Absolutely.
Right. Khalij Times and Saudi-led coalition hits Yemen rebels. UN sets peace stokes state. And it says the Saudi-led coalition bombed rebels in at least 5 northern Yemeni provinces as the United Nations set the date for peace talks on the crisis for next week in Geneva. And it was not immediately clear if any of the warring factions would attend the talks. The internationally recognized government of Yemeni President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi, now in exile in Saudi Arabia, has demanded that the rebels known as Houthis first pull out of towns and cities, including the capital Sana'a, which they captured a power grab that started last year. Now, what we're speaking about is that there were already a ceasefire, and rather there was a ceasefire and there were negotiations. The Houthis boycotted those negotiations because it was called by Saudi Arabia. Fine. Now the UN sets peace talks, so it is taking the matter to the international community's scene. Fine. From your point of view, would the UN succeed in putting a breakthrough for the Yemeni crisis when the UN has never really put a breakthrough in any of other files it had? Not the Yemeni, the Iraqi, neither the Syrian, nor nothing, no file. And we have, and the Middle East still continuing on unabated here. So we're speaking about taking the Yemeni crisis to the international arena. How do you view this?
Two comments here. The first comment is that, just as a blanket statement, a situation in Yemen needs to be resolved simply on moral grounds. We're looking at 820 people which have been killed, over 7,000 people which have been wounded, claims of over 500,000 people which have been displaced by this particular conflict. So on humanitarian terms, the situation is getting to be really dire. As far as specifically the role of the UN, I think, in my particular opinion, that the UN has displayed a major failure on this particular file, specifically with the UN Special Envoy at the beginning of this crisis back in February, Gamal bin Omar, who has successfully been accused by all sides that he is not really resolving. So the UN envoy at that time failed to get the buy-in of any of the warring or conflicting parties in order to resolve this. So as exactly the piece of news here is saying, there are very significant doubts whether anyone will attend those particular negotiations, and if anybody attended, that there will be anything that will come out of it, unfortunately.
Then hence we can speak over about a mediator, a real mediator accepted for all grounds. And we're speaking here about Egypt, for instance.
Correct, correct. I think the role I think Egypt could play this particular role politically is very well positioned to do a lot of the talks that needs to be done behind the scenes, specifically with the parties which are not clearly in the fighting picture.
Right. Moving on to the Bulletin, and UK Assad is lying over barrel bomb use in Syria, and it says the United States condemned the regime's use of barrel bombs after mobile phone video footage emerged showing barrel bombs being dropped from a helicopter. British Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs Philip Hammond has condemned the Bashar al-Assad regime for its use of barrel bombs against civilians in Syria. Well, the whole situation in Syria is very much complicated, since we're speaking about different factors playing on the ground. So we're speaking about a regime that is fully outraged and continuing on with killing its people, which is unfortunate. But on the other side, radicals, terrorists, and even intelligence playing on the Syrian grounds. Now, this Syrian situation is very, very much complicated. A breakthrough for the Syrian situation in this upcoming stage?
Unfortunately not. What we are going, and then I say unfortunately with great sorrow, unfortunately not, specifically that none of the parties is strategically positioned to score a decisive win. What we will see, as we have seen in previous weeks, is that al-Assad regime is now being pushed by a temporary coalition of all the fighting forces on the ground. They're pushing a lot on the Assad regime. However, as we've seen historically in the past 3 years, it will be just a matter of time before al-Assad regime claims grounds another time. But I think the issue here, as we come and talk about whether the issue of using chemical weapons or using those type of bombs against civilians, I think this poses what I would call a reputational problem even over international forces such as the US and the UK, because according to all those administrations, I think everybody, President Obama involved, they thought that this issue is closed, that the file of al-Assad using chemical weapons or using any weapons against civilians is closed, and they've backed away from this story. The fact that the international community has backed away from Syria, we're also looping into the question, will make this situation unfortunately linger for time unknown.
Yes, and very much indeed, very much weird to open such a file when the regime were able to push back the Daesh from Palmyra. Anyway, our time is out. I have to end it here. Dr. Mohammed Fouad, economic and political analyst, we thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And dear viewers, many thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the top stories coming right after this program.